الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلوات وأتم التسليم على سيد الأولين والآخرين، سيدنا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وتبعه إلى يوم الدين، وارض اللهم عنا معهم، اللهم آمين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا خالصا لوجهك صوابا لسنة نبيك. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. بفضل الله تعالى ومنه, by the grace and favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we managed last lesson to completely finish the topic of makharij al-huruf, the articulation points or the exit points of the letters. We first gave a very brief introduction of the 5 primary tools of articulation or faculties of articulation, from furthest away from the outside to closest, those being al-jawf, al-halq, al-lisan, al-shafatan, and al-khayshum. And we eventually found and described what every faculty is used for and what letters exit therefrom, whether primary or secondary or specific makhraj or general makhraj. And we found that al-jawf is where the vowel comes from, very briefly, and al-halq is 6 letters come from it, are pronounced from it, and al-lisan has 18 letters that come from it, and finally al-shafatan, the 2 lips, have 4 letters, and khayshum is a secondary makhraj for the noon and the mim. We also gave a very brief introduction to sifat al-huruf, and that is the second large theoretical category of Tajweed, the first being al-makharij, the second being sifat al-huruf, and the third being the general rulings of Tajweed. For sifat al-huruf, we briefly described as answering how the letters are pronounced as opposed to where they are pronounced from. So the makharij, the exit points, quite literally the exit points, tells you where each letter precisely comes from. The characteristic of, or the characteristics of said letter will tell you how that letter exits from its makhraj and how it sounds. So a few important points to make before we get into the topic. Number 1, some sifat are more critical than others. If you recall in the very beginning when we were discussing al-lahnu fi tilawati al-Quran, mistakes when reciting the Quran, some of the examples we gave were deficiencies in sifat. For example, qalqala, which we discuss properly eventually inshallah under this topic. We said a minor mistake or hidden mistake, lahn khafi, would be saying قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ without the qalqala. That would technically be a hidden mistake or lahn khafi. At other times, if a particular characteristic is missing from a letter, it would be a major mistake. And we gave brief examples when discussing makharij. This specifically becomes the case when you have one or more than one letter coming out from one subcategory of articulation. For example, the tip of the tongue. We have tha, the, and la all coming from more or less the same articulation point, the tip of the tongue with the tip of al-thana al-ulya. The only thing essentially, according to say that this is the case, and to those who say that this is the case, the only matter which differentiates one letter from another is the sifat. So the heaviness of the va, the jahr of the dal, the hams of the tha, and so on. So just to mention that, don't simply have the idea that sifat, the characteristics of the letters, are some secondary issue. لا, sometimes it is just as critical as the makhraj. So missing out a sifa of a particular letter may change it completely, either to a corrupt sound which doesn't exist in Arabic, or changing one letter from another, both of which are major mistakes, as we mentioned in the discussion of al-lahn fi tilawat al-Quran. That is number one. Number two, in the books of Tajweed and even the poems of Tajweed, the texts of the science, there are sifat that are mentioned that have no impact whatsoever on the sound produced. We won't even get into those. We're not interested in any linguistic anecdotes or anything like that. What we are interested in is the sound that comes when pronouncing a particular letter. That is what we are most interested in. So things like Arabic morphology or sarf, we couldn't care less about that for our purposes. We specifically care about and are interested in the sounds of the Arabic letters and how to achieve the correct articulation as well as the characteristics of any given letter. طيب, so that is number two. And number three, and this is where we begin to get into it, inshallah. There are two types or sets of characteristics. One, characteristics which have a direct opposite, meaning it's either this characteristic or that characteristic. So this sifa or that one. And those are four types for our purposes. And there are those which do not have an opposite. لا ضد لهم. And those are many, and we discuss them when we discuss them, insha'Allah ta'ala. What we are going to begin with is the sifat, or the characteristics, which do have an opposite. So it either falls into that category, this characteristic, or the one which is opposite to it. Not just one arbitrary sifa. طيب, بسم الله. There are four sifat that have a direct opposite to them. طيب, those four characteristics are in Arabic. Okay. So we start with استعلاء and istifal. I'll write them first and then we're going to go through what they actually mean completely. After انفتاح. إطباق and انفتاح. That's number 2. Number 3 would be hams, the opposite of which is jah. And number 4, this is a slightly different one, but we have shidda. Its opposite is rakhawa. And you have a middle state. This is why it's different. You can call it wasatiyya or bayniyya, doesn't really matter. But the point is, it's neither that or that. It's in the middle. طيب. There's a reason why I deliberately did not try to translate them. And the reason is that creates more confusion than anything else. If possible, do try to memorize key terms. Do try to memorize accurate terminology. So specific terminology to the science, it would be very useful if you know, if you're able to apply it, and because otherwise it creates a particular barrier. There are times where it's very appropriate to translate keywords, but there are other times where it is usually best to stick with the native word in transliteration or whatever, along with an explanation of said word. So, isti'la and istifal. This is a very good example of why it could create confusion. Isti'la and istifal, those two characteristics have so many different translations. Literally, isti'la means highness, and istifal, lowness or lowliness. So many translations would be big and small, fat and thin, heavy and light. The one which I personally prefer is full mouth and empty mouth. Regardless, it's very easy to get carried away with things like that. And the most important thing is to know what that word actually entails. And that we're going to explain that properly once we get to it. After we just go a very brief introduction, inshallah. Itbaq and infitah, closeness and openness. Hams and jah, literally, once again, this is whispering and vocality. I guess we can translate as that. Shidda and rakhawa is strength and ease, or difficulty and ease. And baniya is in between. Bayn comes from between. That's just a very brief introduction to the 4 characteristics which have a direct opposite. There was one more, but we said we're not going to get into morphology or sarf or anything like that. So we're going to leave it at those characteristics which matter to pronunciation. Jameel. We'll get into it one by one, inshallah. There's one more point, I guess, to mention before we start describing the characteristics. It's that, according to the most accurate view, Allahu A'lam, every single sifa applies to its respective letter in all its cases. Meaning, let's say isti'la, one of its letters is kha. The kha has isti'la when it has a fatha, has isti'la when it has sukun, kasra, dhamma, whatever else you can shadda, whatever else you can think of. The same thing with any other letter. Every letter that has a particular characteristic, that characteristic applies in all its cases. The only thing is, with most characteristic, it is more obvious, it's more apparent, or that characteristic is brought out more in the case of sukun. Why? Sukun, what you essentially do when you pronounce letter with sukun is that you lane it back. there is no other vowel by definition. So when you pronounce the letter with sukoon, it is literally just the sound of that letter, nothing more, nothing less. There's no a, e, u, there's no anything else. It's just that sound that the letter makes. So once you have that, just the sound the letter makes, you can really analyze what's going on when you pronounce it. That is why, for the vast majority of cases, the sukoon will bring out the characteristic most. However, it does not mean that the characteristic is lost when it is in other cases like fatha, dhamma, or kasra. Hope that point is clear. طيب, we won't actually, thinking about it now, we probably won't follow this order of explanation. We start with the simplest first, which is probably hams and jar, to most complicated, because with istila and istifal you get a lot of exceptions and a lot of cases, and all that. So we just start with simplest to most complex, inshallah. So we start with hams. So this was just an introduction. طيب. In terms of explanation, we start number one, hams. Hams and jar. So hams versus jar. And jar. طيب. As we said, hams literally means whisper. And jar literally means loudness or vocality. Both words in the Quran. ولا تجهر بصلاتك ولا تخافت بها ولا تسمع إلا همسا. But both have different connotations when in the ayah. The point is, those are linguistic meanings. What we care about is the practical or specific scientific meaning when we say hams or jar. Hams refers to an airy characteristic for some letters, such that when the letter is pronounced, an excessive or noticeable amount of air is exited from the lungs or the mouth when it's pronounced. Yeah, it is not the case. There is no excessive amount of air. As well as that, there is activation of the vocal cords. With hams and jah, there are two things happening respectively. Hams, there is air that is exited when the letter is pronounced. Number two, there is no activation of the vocal cords. Jah, there is no air or minimal negligible air that is exited from the mouth. And number two, there is clear and noticeable activation of the vocal cords. So that's why they're direct opposites. So hopefully that makes sense. With characteristics, you will get a lot of acronyms. I think they count as acronyms. Essentially, they take the letters that apply, let's say, to hams and just make a sentence in it, just so that it's easier to remember for students. So the sentence wherein the letters of hams are contained is the following: فحثه شخص سيء. Don't worry too much about the meaning. It's just a sentence that makes sense linguistically to remember the letters. So letters are, as you can see, fa, ha, fa. there are 10 letters of hams. Fa, ha, tha, ha, sha, ha, sa, sa, ka, ta. Those are the 10 letters that apply to hams. The letters that have jah, logically, are all the other ones but these 10. So 10 letters that have jah, 10 letters that have hams, and automatically there are 18 letters that have jah. The letters that have jah is, or are rather, all the other letters. The 18 letters other than those 10 have jah. So generally speaking, you find this trend, and it makes perfect sense. When you have two opposing characteristics, you just focus on the one that has less letters included within it, and just say everything else is that one, as opposed to just describing those letters for this and those letters for that, which just takes long and makes it more difficult to know the letters. So everything that is not within فَحَثَّهُ شَخْصٌ سَكَتَ automatically has jah. طيب, as you can see, and we'll actually do it for every single one just for the sake of clarification, every one of those 10 letters, number one, has a clear amount of air that is exited when it's pronounced, and two, has no activation of the vocal cords. طيب, we'll take the sukun case, because as we said, that's the one that brings out the characteristic most, and try it for every single one and show why this is the case. And you're invited to do the same. So, F, 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 Ah, S, Ah, Ash, Akh, As, S, Ak, At. By the way, what I just did is I put an arbitrary hamza with a fatha in the beginning, and just whatever letter I wanted, just put a sukun. This just represents any letter. This is a very good way to practice your letters. Just get a hamza in the beginning, because it's a very easy thing to pronounce. Put a fatha on it, and get whichever letter you want to test or practice, and put it in that. So, as was just demonstrated, quite a clear and audible even amount of air that is exited with every single one of those letters, and no activity of the vocal cords. Everything else would have the exact opposite. Activation of vocal cords and no air. We'll do it with a few. So the hamza, clearly the vocal cords activated and there's no air. Ab, same thing. So skip a few. Aj, same thing again. We'll do one more. Ad, quite clearly, those type of letters that we just pronounced, like the hamza, the ba, the jim, the dal, the dad, al, number one, the vocal cords activated, and number two, there's no eggs. So hopefully that's clear. It's literally just that simple. Nothing more, nothing less. That's why normally, and even in Jazariya, I think, the first sifa that is discussed is sifat al-hams and jah. So inshallah, nothing too complicated there. Allahu A'lam. One very quick note to make is that there is a voice that was going about, and I guess it is between Allahu A'lam. It's just that hams only applies to when it has sukun. Specifically with the ta and the kaf. So every other letter is fine, but the ta and the kaf, when they have a fatha, dhamma, or kasra, they do not have hams, according to those who say that it doesn't. This is not the case. And their logic, it would be something along the lines of, due to other characteristics like shidda, which we're going to discuss, hams is a weaker characteristic, so shidda takes precedence and it loses its hams. But this is not the case. The important thing to remember, so even fatha and kasra, ka, ki, tu, at, ka, ki, ku, ak. Quite clearly, there is hams. طيب, number 2. We discuss a very similar topic, but not exactly the same. We discuss shidda, its opposite, which is what? Rakhawa. And in the middle, bayniyya. We'll finish this and probably call it inshallah. Shidda linguistically means difficulty or constriction or strength even. Rakhawa, the opposite, ease, laziness, or just rakhawa. Bayniyya is just literally means that which is in between. طيب. What this refers to practically in the science of Tajweed, shidda, or the letters that have the characteristic of shidda, the letter cannot be pronounced continuously. If I take the sukun case, for example, and this where obviously it's always clearest, it is impossible to continuously pronounce letters of shidda. Essentially, the sound gets cut off as soon as the makhraj is hit, if that makes sense. The sound, not air. Forget about it. Air, as we said, hams is a different case to shidda. There is overlap, as you're going to find out, but it is a different concept because it refers to sound, not just air. Rakhawa, the opposite to shidda, you can very easily and comfortably continuously pronounce a particular sound or the letter. The letters that have rakhawa, you can easily and comfortably pronounce them continuously. Bayniyya, naturally, is between the two. It is neither that nor that. That is perhaps the definition which makes most sense when describing shidda and rakhawa and bayniyya. Another one, which you may or may not agree with particularly, is referring to has overlap with the previous concept, but shidda and rakhawa refer to the length or the amount of time that the letter is pronounced when in a state of sukoon. Not outside the Quran in an arbitrary case, as we just did, so that's too long in the practical Quranic case when you're actually reciting, but in an actual Quranic state. So just to give an example, just to get the idea across. يظلمون. If you compare the Allah to the qaf in the word يقتلون, according to those who say it does, the Allah has a longer pronunciation period than the qaf. This gets somewhat philosophical, and then I think it's a bit of an unnecessary discussion. The most important thing to focus on is the fact that you simply cannot pronounce letters of shidda continuously, and with rakhawa It is the natural state thing to do. And بينية is neither here or there. طيب, very briefly then, or quickly rather, the letters of shidda are أجد قط بكت. حمزة جيم دال قاف طا با كاف تا. Every single one of these letters, even if you try, you will not be able to pronounce them continuously in the sukun case. And we'll do so, or we try to do so now, just to prove the case. So, as we always do, we'll take Hamza with the fatha, because it's an easy letter, and take whatever letter we want and put sukun on it and test it out. This is our testing methodology. So, Hamza, put in there, be a. A. Sound ends very abruptly. Dal, ad. Qaf, aql. Ta, aql. Ba, ab. Kaf, ak. Ta, at. If you try to continuously pronounce any of these letters, straight away they lose their true essence. So the jim, for example, aj, that's incorrect. It's not a correct jim. The jim is aj, aj, aj. That's the jim. Same thing with the qaf. If you try somehow to continuously pronounce it, you may end up something like a kha. So saying aq, it changes its nature. It corrupts the sound. The point is, all of these letters in the sukun case cannot be pronounced continuously. So those are the letters of what? Shidda. They are how many? 8. We'll discuss Bainiyya first. So between that state and Rakhawa is the following letters, the following 5 letters. Actually, we'll take it off. We'll take it off and write them out properly, just for the sake of clarity. Lin Umar. Lin Umar. Those are the 5 letters of Bainiyya. Neither can you very comfortably and easy just continue to pronounce them as you can the letters of Rakhawa. At the same time, they're nowhere near as severe and strong and difficult as the letters of Shidda. Let's take them one by one. So then, al, noon, an, a, ar. As you can see with each one of them, it is not sudden, it is not a very abrupt end to the sound, as is the case with all the letters of Shidda. But it is not easy going either. It is somewhere in the middle. So if I tried to continuously pronounce the lam, it wouldn't be very natural. It would be al or an or ah ar, in a very natural, without any takalluf, without any excess or forcing myself. You'll find that with those 5 letters, they are neither as easygoing as letters of Rakhawa, nor are they as difficult as letters of Shidna. Finally, the letters of Rakhawa are everything else. They're normally not mentioned, there is no acronym for them. You have Shidda, Ajid, Qattin, Bakat, Bainiyya, Lin Umar, and then everything else is automatically Rakhawa. The reason why I mentioned there's overlap between Rakhawa and Hams is because all of the letters of Hams are letters of Rakhawa, but 2, Ta and Kaf. The Ta and Kaf, as you just found, Ajid, Qat, and Bakat, they're both letters of Shidda, so Ak. You can't continuously pronounce it. At. Whereas the Fa, Af, Ah, F, Ah, Ash, Akh, As, S, all 8, but the last 2, the Sin and the Kaf, are letters of ease, meaning all 8 letters of Hams, other than the Kaf and the Ta, are letters of Rakhawa at the same time. As well as that, you have the Allah, for example, then you have the Blood, and other letters. The point is, if it's not one of the 8 of Shidda, and it's not one of the 5 of Bainiyya, then automatically it must be Rakhawa. So Allah, let's take an example. Very easily and very comfortably can be pronounced for a long time. Same thing with the Zal, its counterpart, or the empty mouth version. And so on and so forth. Hopefully that concept is clear. We won't get too much into the discussion of the period of time for which each letter is pronounced in the Quranic words, as that will require some somewhat deep analysis of the meters of recitation and whatnot. And we just want to get the sounds correct for now, and we leave philosophical discussions for the appropriate time, inshallah ta'ala. Like, those were 2 very clear and very simple characteristics with the opposite. Hams and Jahr, it's opposite. Hams having 10 letters, Jahr having 18 letters, and Shidda having 8, Baini having 5, and Rakhawa having the rest, which would be, if you do quick maths, is 15 letters of Rakhawa. The 8 of Hams, and then an extra 7. طيب. One final point I forgot to mention at the very beginning, I'll mention it now. It is that it is not the case, just because some people get confused, that once a letter has a particular characteristic, that's the only characteristic it has. Not at all. You can think of each, specifically these ones, the 4 that we mentioned in the beginning, each characteristic or set of characteristics as looking at the letters from one particular perspective. So from the perspective of vocal cord activation and airiness, we can categorize letters into letters of Hams and letters of Jahr. And from the point of view of the strength of the sound and the ease of pronunciation and continuation of articulation, we can characterize the letters into Shidda, Rakhawa, and Bainiyya. And from the point of view of heaviness or full mouthness, you can categorize the letters into Isti'la and Istifal, and so on and so forth. So it's not that once the Sad is one letters of Hams, it can't be letters of Rakhawa and it can't be letters of Isti'la. لا طبعا. each letter can have, and actually letters do have, much more than one characteristic. All 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet will be included in every single characteristic. So, for example, the hams and jah, 10 are hams, 18 are jah. For the shidda and the rakhawa, 8 shidda, 5 bainiyya, and rest rakhawa. So once again, they categorized all of them within each characteristic. So it's not that once you categorize them in one, you can't categorize them again. لا طبعا. So hopefully that's clear. Characteristics, inshallah ta'ala, are simpler than or easy to remember, wallahu a'lam, just my opinion, than the articulation points. It's much more, and you can picture it easily, the sifat as opposed to the makharij. Inshallah, they won't take as much time as the makharij do. والله تعالى أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.